Hello, dear friends of YouTube. No matter where you are in life, sometimes we all need a moment of peace and quiet. So today, I want to read some Reddit stories for you to make you focus better or just to keep you company in the background. This time, we're looking at malicious compliance. If you're new here, welcome. Each day, I bring you fresh narratives from Reddit, ideal for unwinding, finding a moment of peace, or simply sharing a quiet interlude while you study. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're listening in from and which of today's stories was your favorite. Get comfortable, prepare your favorite snack, and let's get these stories going. The town clerk refused my permit over a technicality, so I used her own ordinance to bankrupt her boss's pet project. Hey everyone. This is a story I've wanted to post here for years, but I was waiting until the dust fully settled, mostly so no one could trace it back to me. Let's just say, if you've ever lived in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business, you'll get this immediately. I, 38M, run a small construction company in a rural town of about 9,000 people. Nothing fancy. We build decks, garages, small houses, that kind of thing. I grew up here, my dad was in construction, and I've had the same crew for years. We're good at what we do, we stay out of drama. At least we used to. The setup a few years back, the town decided to modernize their permit process. They brought in a new zoning and permits director, a woman I'll call Carla, to bring the system up to compliance. Carla came from a bigger city and had that attitude. You know the type. Clipboard, laser printer, condescending smile. She treated every contractor like a potential criminal. Still, I tried to be polite. The first few months weren't terrible. A little extra paperwork, some new fees, nothing we couldn't handle. Then came the Maple Street job. I was building a small 2-story addition for a retired couple. They'd saved for years. Plans were drawn, engineering approved, materials ordered. We'd done everything by the book. When I went to pull the final building permit, Carla looked at my paperwork for maybe 30 seconds and said, "Your site plan is incomplete." I asked, "What's missing?" She pointed to the title block, the bottom right corner of the drawing, and said, "You didn't include the north arrow." I thought she was joking. "You mean the little arrow that shows which way is north?" "Yes," she said, completely serious. "That's required by section 4.3.2 of the zoning submission guidelines." I said, "I can draw it on right now." She smiled like a cat. "Sorry, submissions can't be altered after filing. You'll need to resubmit with the correct plans." That meant paying another $250 fee and waiting 2 more weeks for review, all for a missing arrow. The first, compliance. So, I complied. I redrew the plan, added the world's biggest north arrow you've ever seen, thick, bold, labeled like a compass, and resubmitted it. 2 weeks later, she approved it. I figured, whatever, it's done. But then word spread among other contractors. She was doing this to everyone. Rejecting plans for the tiniest reasons. Wrong font size. Stapled in the wrong corner, missing initials on page 3. She was padding her stats. The mayor had apparently told her to enforce all codes strictly after a political spat over unsafe rentals, so she went nuclear. The breaking point fast forward 3 months. I'm applying for a variance, basically an exception, for a garage that's 6 inches over the setback line. The homeowner had a weirdly shaped lot, and there was no practical way to move it. Normally, the zoning board approves those without issue. Carla, however, decided to play hardball. She denied the application before it even reached the board. "You failed to submit the accessory structure drainage statement. That's a 1-page form saying the garage won't redirect rainwater into a neighbor's yard." I'd filed it, attached to the plans. She claimed she didn't see it. When I pointed to the line item on my submission checklist, she said, "If it's not physically attached to the permit form itself, it's considered missing." It was literally stapled right behind it. I told her, "You realize this delay is going to cost my client money, right?" She just shrugged. "That's not my problem. Resubmit." That's when something in me snapped. The research. That night, I pulled up the entire town zoning code online. It's 600 pages long, dry, repetitive, written in legalese. I read the whole thing. Around page 217, under Administrative Authority, I found a small clause. All properties zoned as mixed-use commercial shall undergo full reclassification if any structural modification or change of primary use occurs without an approved pre-construction permit. In normal words, if a commercial building makes any changes, even cosmetic, without filing the right permit, their zoning becomes invalid. Why did that matter? Because the town had just approved a massive new community arts center, spearheaded by none other than the mayor's office and managed by, you guessed it, Carla's department. And I happened to know, because my buddy was on the crew, that they'd already started demo work before their construction permit was technically approved. All I had to do was make that known publicly. The compliance, I wrote a polite, formal email to the Planning Commission, CCing the town council, and said, I recently noticed that the Community Arts Centre project has begun interior demolition. Could you please confirm whether a pre-construction permit was filed and approved before work commenced? Per Ordinance 9.3.5b, I'm asking for clarification so I can ensure my own compliance. Within 24 hours, the entire project got shut down. Apparently, their permit hadn't been signed off yet. It was sitting on Carla's desk waiting for the mayor's signature. The same person who'd rejected my application over a missing north arrow had just violated her own ordinance. The fallout. The next town council meeting was standing room only. Contractors showed up, homeowners showed up. Even the local paper was there. During public comment, I stepped up to the mic, calm, polite, smiling. I'm not here to point fingers, I said, but I'd like to understand why the town can enforce rules so harshly on small businesses, down to the direction of an arrow, yet overlook the same rules when it benefits itself. You could hear a pin drop. Carla tried to defend herself, claiming it was a clerical misunderstanding, but the town attorney confirmed the truth. Once the project started without a valid pre-construction permit, it triggered automatic zoning reclassification. That meant the entire site had to undergo a new environmental review and public comment period before they could continue. Translation: a 6-month delay and roughly $200,000 in reapplication costs. The aftermath, Carla was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The mayor issued a press release blaming bureaucratic miscommunication. Behind the scenes, everyone knew what really happened. A month later, the town quietly reinstated the old building commissioner, a retired guy named Frank, who'd run the department for 30 years before Carla came in. Frank personally called me chuckling and said, "Heard you found the arrow that broke the camel's back." He reinstated my garage permit that same week. No issues. The homeowners sent me a thank you basket with a bottle of bourbon and a card that said, "To North Arrows and Justice." Update 6 months later. Word travels fast in small towns. Turns out Carla never came back. She moved to another city government job about 2 counties over. But karma works fast here. A friend who works there told me she lasted less than a year before resigning. Apparently after conflicts with local contractors. The best part? The Community Arts Centre finally reopened last summer. Guess who got hired to rebuild part of the framing after their first contractor backed out? Yep, me. They paid full price, no bidding war, no delays. When I went to drop off the plans, I made sure to include a north arrow so big it took up half the page. Update 2, 2 years later. A funny postscript to this whole mess. The town recently revised its entire zoning code. Guess who they hired as a consultant for contractor feedback? Frank recommended me. Now I sit on a small advisory committee that reviews new zoning language before it's finalized. And every time I see an overcomplicated clause, I highlight it and say, "Are we sure we want to make this another North Arrow situation?" Everyone laughs, but they know exactly what I mean. Sometimes it takes one absurdly enforced rule to remind people that bureaucracy only works when it serves people, not egos. TLDR, town zoning clerk denied my permits over petty technicalities, costing clients time and money. I read the zoning code and found a clause that made her own department's project illegal, reported it politely, caused a $200K delay, and got her effectively fired. Later, the town hired me to help fix the broken system she created. Some rules exist to maintain order, others exist to protect power, and sometimes the only way to fix both is with a very, very large north arrow. Our next story takes us from small-town politics to corporate revenge again. This time from the perspective of a customer service rep who was told to never issue refunds under any circumstances. You can probably guess how well that went when a major client got billed twice for the same order. My boss told us to never issue refunds, so I didn't, and we lost our biggest client. Hey folks, this one's from about 3 years ago, back when I worked for a mid-sized software company that specialized in inventory management systems for businesses. Think SaaS for warehouses. I was a customer support rep, one of about 20 on the floor. The job wasn't glamorous, lots of troubleshooting, lots of angry customers, lots of listening to people scream because a barcode scanner wouldn't sync, but I was good at it. I understood that half the job wasn't technical, it was human. When someone's system is down and they're losing money, they don't need jargon, they need empathy and a solution. Our team used to have some flexibility. If a client was genuinely wronged, like a billing error or service outage, we could authorize small refunds, maybe $100 here, $500 there, to smooth things over. Then our new VP of Customer Experience arrived. We'll call her Angela. The setup Angela came from one of those consulting firms that specialize in revenue optimization. That means she talked a lot about KPIs and customer retention funnels, but had never actually talked to an angry customer in her life. On her first day, she gave a presentation with a PowerPoint slide that said in giant letters, "The customer isn't always right. The contract is." We should have known right then, her first major initiative? Refund elimination protocol. She gathered us in a meeting and said, "From now on, no refunds without my personal approval. None. Zero. It sends the wrong message. We're not in the business of apologizing." Someone raised a hand. "What if we double bill someone or the system messes up?" She smiled that corporate smile. "Then we fix the issue, but we don't refund. Credit only. No exceptions." I remember writing in my notebook, "No exceptions. Impending disaster." The warning signs: a few weeks in, we started getting more escalations. Small clients mostly, bakeries, small shops, manufacturers, complaining about being billed twice or charged for services they cancelled. Normally, we'd process a refund, apologize, and everyone moved on. Now we had to say, "We can apply a credit to your account for future use." Half the time, customers said, "I don't want credit, I want my money." That's when the shouting started. We tried to warn Angela that this was a bad idea. She said we needed to train the market to value the partnership more than the dollar. We all knew that was nonsense, but fine, her rule, her mess. The incident then came the Wharton Logistics account. Wharton was one of our biggest clients, a regional freight company with about 300 employees and a 7-figure annual contract. They'd been with us for years. They were basically paying half our department's salaries. One afternoon, I get a call from their operations manager, Kevin. He sounded calm but firm. That dangerous kind of calm that means someone's about to blow. "Hey, your system charged us twice for our quarterly renewal." "Twice?" "Yep, $83,000 twice. We've got the receipts, both cleared." My stomach dropped. That's the kind of mistake that can sink a small business. I looked into it. Sure enough, a processing glitch caused the duplicate charge. I flagged it to finance. They confirmed, refund required, easy fix. But I couldn't issue it, so I escalated to Angela with the subject line, "Urgent, duplicate $83K charge for major client, refund requested." Her reply came 10 minutes later. "No refunds, apply credit to next billing cycle, remind them of their contract terms, section 4.2. I replied, "They don't want credit. They want their $83,000 back." She didn't respond. The compliance. So I followed orders. I called Kevin back, put on my nicest professional voice and said, "Per policy, we can apply the duplicate amount as a credit toward future invoices." There was a long pause. Then he said, "So you're keeping our 83 grand and applying it as store credit?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, that's the current policy." He didn't yell. He just said, "You'll hear from our legal team," and hung up. The next day, our CEO's inbox exploded. Wharton had sent a formal breach of contract notice. Apparently, section 4.2, the The same clause Angela quoted included language that mandated refunds for billing errors within 10 business days. They also copied their lawyers and 3 of our other major clients for transparency. By the end of the week, Wharton cancelled their contract entirely. They were polite but brutal. We can't partner with a vendor that refuses to take financial accountability. The fallout. You know that awkward quiet that hits an office right before someone gets fired? Yeah, that. The next Monday, a surprise all-hands meeting appeared on our calendars. Angela walked in looking like she hadn't slept. Our CEO and CFO were behind her, arms crossed. The CEO spoke first. We've lost Wharton Logistics due to a failure in our customer refund process. Can anyone explain how this policy was allowed to continue? Angela started stammering something about revenue preservation and policy alignment. He cut her off. They were charged twice. You refused to return their money. What did you think would happen? Silence. Then he asked me directly, "You were the rep on this, right?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. I escalated it immediately. I have the emails." He turned to Angela. "Did you approve a no refund response?" She tried to shift blame. Our reps were instructed to use discretion. I interrupted as politely as I could. "With respect, sir, the written policy said no refunds without VP approval. No exceptions. I followed that policy exactly." The CFO raised an eyebrow. "You have that in writing?" I forwarded the email thread on the spot. 10 minutes later, Angela was escorted out by security. The aftermath, it didn't stop there. Losing Wharton caused a domino effect. 2 other major clients left in solidarity, saying they didn't trust our billing system anymore. We lost about $1.2 million in annual revenue. The company scrapped the entire refund elimination protocol and reinstated the old policy, with one extra line: all employees are empowered to authorize refunds up to $10,000 without escalation. I printed that clause and pinned it to my cubicle wall. A month later, I got promoted to customer relations specialist, partly because of how I handled the situation. The CEO even apologized to me personally for putting you in an impossible position. I told him I just followed orders. He gave me this look like he'd learned something the hard way. Update, 6 months later. About half a year after all that, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Kevin, the guy from Wharton. He said, "Hey, thought you'd want to know. We re-signed with your company under a new contract. Heard things have changed." Turns out our new VP, yes, Angela's replacement, reached out, apologized, and rebuilt the relationship from scratch. Kevin also said, "You handled that call better than anyone could have. Didn't take it out on you. We could tell you were stuck following orders." That message made my entire week. Sometimes doing the right thing means doing the wrong thing, if only to prove how stupid the rule was. Update 2, 2 years later. Fast forward to now. I don't work there anymore. I've moved on to a smaller company that actually values people. But, funny story, guess who applied for a position here a few months ago? Angela. She listed her title as former VP of Customer Success at old company. Our hiring manager asked me if I knew her. I said, "Oh, I know her." They passed on her application. When the manager asked why, I said, "She's really good at preventing refunds." Unfortunately, that includes preventing the company from staying in business. He laughed for a good minute. TLDR. New VP banned refunds completely. I followed orders and refused to refund an $83K double charge to our biggest client. They sued, cancelled, and tanked our revenue. VP got fired, policy got reversed, and I got promoted. Sometimes following the rules isn't about obedience. It's about demonstration. Because nothing proves a bad policy wrong like watching it burn the people who wrote it. Our next story takes that principle out of the corporate world entirely and into a hospital where a nurse was told to never question the doctor's orders. That rule worked fine until the doctor prescribed something that could have killed a patient. The doctor told us to never question his orders, so we followed them exactly. I've worked as a registered nurse for 14 years, mostly in emergency and critical care. Hospitals have their own politics, sometimes worse than any corporate office I've ever heard about. There are hierarchies, egos, and a long list of people who think being right is more important than saving lives. And that's where this story begins. A few years back, I worked at a mid-sized hospital in the Midwest. We had a decent team, overworked but tight-knit. Everyone watched each other's backs. Then we got a new attending physician, Dr. Hendricks, not his real name, obviously. He was the kind of doctor who made an entrance. Tall, sharp suit under his lab coat, Harvard ring always on display. The kind of guy who called nurses girls even when talking to the 55-year-old charge nurse who probably saved more lives than he'd ever seen. Still, we tried to stay professional. You get all types in medicine, but it became clear within 2 weeks that Dr. Hendricks didn't see nurses as colleagues. He saw us as subordinates. The setup. He micromanaged everything. If you adjusted a patient's IV without running it by him first, he'd write you up. If you paged him too late about a change in vitals, he'd scold you for being careless. If you paged him too early, he'd complain that you were wasting his time. Once, one of our night nurses, Julie, mentioned that a patient's blood sugar readings didn't match their symptoms. Hendricks told her, "Maybe focus on charting what I tell you instead of trying to play doctor." He loved that phrase. Play doctor. Like we were kids pretending, not professionals with years of training. Then one morning during a staff huddle, he dropped the bomb. He said, "I've noticed too much independent interpretation from nursing staff. From now on, I expect my orders to be followed exactly as written. No deviations, no questions. If you have concerns, bring them up after the shift." Our charge nurse, a quiet, steady woman named Marianne, raised an eyebrow and said, "Doctor, are you sure that's a good idea? Sometimes conditions change." He cut her off. "Then page me, but do not act on your own judgment. Understood?" He said it in front of everyone, loud enough that even the janitor in the hallway looked up. We all exchanged looks. Fine. You want blind obedience? You'll get it. The incident about a week later. We admitted a patient I'll call Mr. T, late 60s, diabetic, recovering from surgery. Post-op infection risk, but stable. His glucose levels were fluctuating a bit, which isn't uncommon after anesthesia. Dr. Hendricks wrote his orders for insulin doses, and he wrote them by hand because he didn't trust electronic systems. That'll be important later. Around 3 p.m., I was covering that section of the ward. Julie, the same nurse he'd embarrassed earlier, was on the next pod over. She glanced at Mr. T's chart and frowned. "Hey, his order says 20 units regular insulin, subcutaneous, every hour?" I looked over. That can't be right. Normally, you'd give maybe 2 units for someone in his condition. 20 per hour would tank his glucose and potentially kill him. But the order was there, clear as day. His handwriting wasn't great, but the number looked unambiguous. 20. Julie paged him, no response. Paged again, still nothing. She looked at me and said, "What do we do?" I thought about his little speech. No deviations, no questions. Follow exactly as written. So I said, "We follow the order." Exactly. The compliance, we drew up the insulin, verified it with a second nurse, as protocol requires, documented every step and administered it. Then we paged him again. "Doctor, insulin administered per written order, patient's glucose 155 prior to dose, will recheck in 30 minutes. Still nothing. 30 minutes later, we checked again. Glucose had crashed to 48. The patient was sweating, disoriented, slurring his words. Julie and I immediately administered IV glucose per emergency protocol, which we are absolutely authorized to do to prevent hypoglycemia. By the time Dr. Hendricks finally appeared, Mr. T was stabilizing again. He stormed into the room, red-faced. "What the hell happened here?" Julie, calm as ever, said, "We followed your written order, doctor. 20 units of regular insulin every hour." He grabbed the chart, flipped through it and froze. "That's not a 20. That's a 2. Who read this?" I said. "It was verified by 2 nurses. Looked like a 20 to both of us." He sputtered something about incompetence and basic numeracy. Marianne, our charge nurse, walked in right then and said, "Doctor, per your directive, we followed your orders exactly as written. We did not deviate, question, or interpret. Just as you instructed." He went silent. For the first time since he'd started, he looked unsure of himself. The fallout, Mr. T recovered fine. Thankfully, he was a tough old guy with a sense of humor. Later he joked, "Guess that's one way to kickstart my metabolism." But word got around. Fast. The incident report went straight to risk management. Normally, nurses get the blame when something like this happens, but this time we had ironclad documentation, his handwritten order, his directive from the meeting, our verification logs, and the timestamps showing he ignored multiple pages. The hospital's internal review concluded that we'd acted in compliance with established physician directives. Translation: we followed orders. Dr. Hendricks was furious. He tried to argue that we should have known better, but the medical director shut him down. "You instructed the nursing staff to follow your orders exactly." They did. He was placed on administrative review for creating an unsafe communication environment. He lasted maybe 2 more months before transferring to a private clinic 2 towns over. The aftermath. After he left, the hospital quietly changed policy. We got a memo that said all physician orders must be entered electronically and verified for clarity. Nursing staff are encouraged to question any order that seems unsafe or inconsistent with patient presentation. In other words, they rewrote his rule into the exact opposite. Julie and I both got commendations for our adherence to documented protocol. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Mr. T sent us a thank you card after he was discharged, with a little note that said, "Thank you for following bad instructions just long enough to prove they were bad." I still have it pinned in my locker. Update 1 year later. Fast forward a year, I ran into Marianne, our former charge nurse, at a conference. Over coffee, she told me the aftermath was even messier than we knew. Apparently, Dr. Hendricks tried to sue the hospital for defamation after his suspension. The hospital's lawyers pulled out his own words from that staff meeting, the "no questions" speech, which multiple people had recorded on their phones because it was so outrageous. The case didn't make it past discovery. He dropped it quietly, but get this. A few months later, the same hospital network hired him as a consultant for a communication improvement pilot program. He lasted 3 weeks before HR restructured the initiative. Some people never learn. Update 2, 4 years later. I'm at a different hospital now, better culture, better leadership. But last month, a new resident said something that made me laugh out loud. My professor told us about a case study where a doctor's handwritten insulin order caused a near-fatal event because nurses followed it literally. It's used in safety training now. I asked what hospital it was. He said the name of my old one. Apparently, our incident is now official training material in nursing school case books about communication failures and hierarchy in medicine. Our compliance became a textbook lesson. I told him, "Glad to know we're famous for doing exactly what we were told." He didn't get the joke, but that's okay. He will one day. For us, TLDR. New doctor demanded that nurses never question his orders. He wrote an insulin dose incorrectly. We followed it exactly. The patient nearly went into hypoglycemic shock, and the doctor got investigated and eventually fired. Hospital policy now requires nurses to question unsafe orders. Some people think authority means control, but real authority, the kind that saves lives, comes from trust, not fear. Our next story takes us out of the hospital and into a high school, where a teacher's no late homework accepted rule backfired spectacularly when a straight A student decided to teach him a lesson in logic and policy loopholes. My teacher said no late homework will be accepted, no exceptions, so I turned mine in on time and ruined his grading system. Alright, so this story takes place about 10 years ago, when I was a senior in high school. I wasn't a troublemaker. In fact, I was the opposite of that kid. Straight A student, honor roll, joined too many clubs, borderline teacher's pet. But this was the one time in my life I pulled off the most satisfying act of academic level malicious compliance I've ever seen. Our school had this history teacher, Mr. Carmichael. He was infamous, not mean exactly, just rigid, like old school Cold War era kind of rigid. He'd been teaching for 30 plus years and still graded on carbon copy forms. Literally. He made us fill out blue books for essays instead of typing them. He had a typewriter in his classroom. A typewriter. He also loved rules. His classroom had laminated policy posters covering the walls. No late work accepted, no exceptions. Punctuality is respect. Failure to plan is planning to fail, and he enforced them to the letter. If you turned in homework 1 minute after the bell, you got a 0. If your name wasn't in the upper right corner, 0. If you stapled your paper on the left instead of the upper left, 0. No exaggeration, he once threw away a perfectly written essay because the student used 11-point font instead of 12. The setup I was taking his AP US government class. It was the hardest one in the school, but it was also a graduation requirement for the college prep track. He wasn't evil, he just thought he was preparing us for the real world. That fall, we had a huge semester-long project, a policy analysis paper. It was worth 40% of our final grade. We had 4 months to research, outline, draft, and submit a 20-page paper. Mr. Carmichael hammered the rule every week. No late submissions, no excuses. I don't care if your dog dies or the Wi-Fi explodes. You turn it in on time or you fail. Everyone joked about it at first, but he meant it. Then December came, final week of the semester. The catalyst. On the morning the project was due, a massive snowstorm hit, like full-on Midwest blizzard. Power outages, buses cancelled, half the county shut down. Our school, however, did not close. They delayed the start time by 2 hours. That was enough to throw everyone off. Kids couldn't print their papers, the local library was closed, even the copy shop was snowed in. I was one of the few students with a generator at home, so I managed to print mine, barely, on my ancient HP printer that sounded like a dying fax machine. When I got to school, only about 60% of the class made it. The rest were absent due to weather, car trouble, or snowed-in driveways. Mr. Carmichael looked at the half-empty classroom and said, if they cared about their education, they'd be here. We all thought he was joking. He wasn't. The rule that afternoon, he sent an email to the entire class. Per course policy, all papers were due by the start of class today. Students who were absent for any reason will receive a 0. No late work accepted, no exceptions. Cue chaos. Dozens of students and parents emailed the administration, arguing that it was literally unsafe to drive. But technically, the school had been open, so Carmichael had cover. The principal called him in for a meeting. We heard later that he refused to budge. If I make one exception, I have to make them for everyone. Life isn't fair. The principal sighed and let it go. So roughly half the class was about to fail an AP course, not for lack of effort, but because of a snowstorm. I was furious. Then I remembered something. The loophole. See, Mr. Carmichael had another ironclad rule. Assignments must be handed directly to me, not placed on my desk, not slid under the door, not emailed, handed to me. He'd said that exact line dozens of times. It was his mantra. But his project instructions didn't specify when the paper had to be handed to him, only that it had to be before the end of the semester. His email said due by start of class, but the printed syllabus, the one he'd given us on day 1 and made us sign, said, and I quote, all final projects must be submitted to the instructor in person prior to the end of the term. End of term was technically Friday at 3 p.m. Our class was Monday. So I got an idea, the compliance. That Friday after school ended, I walked to Mr. Carmichael's classroom. He was packing up his papers into one of his old briefcases. I said, hi Mr. Carmichael, I just wanted to turn in my project. He frowned. You already did, I smiled. Not mine. I'm delivering these on behalf of everyone who couldn't make it Monday. He said, those are late. I held up the signed syllabus. Actually, they're not. It says due before the end of the term, and it's 2:47 p.m. Friday. Term ends at 3. He blinked. That's not what I meant. I said, I know, but it's what you wrote. He tried to argue. But I just left the stack of neatly labeled manila envelopes on his desk, said, have a great winter break, and walked out. The fallout. The next week, grades were posted. Every student who'd been absent Monday, about 17 people, got a big fat 0 for the project. And then, about 3 days later, chaos erupted again, because several of their parents, who happened to be lawyers, school board members, or donors, pointed out that the syllabus is a legally binding academic contract between teacher and student. And the syllabus said, prior to the end of term. The administration held a review. Turns out every student who turned in their paper before Friday at 3 p.m. had technically met the requirement, including all the ones I delivered. The principal overruled Carmichael's grading and forced him to accept every single one of them. He was livid. The best part? He had to issue a written apology for misinterpreting policy to the class. It was 3 sentences long and sounded like he typed it through gritted teeth. Due to a miscommunication regarding the submission deadline, I have adjusted the grading for the semester project. Future assignments will follow clearly stated timelines. Regards, Mr. Carmichael. We printed it and taped it to his classroom door. The aftermath: for the rest of the year, he tried to be extra precise in his wording, but the damage was done. Students started quoting his own rules back to him anytime he tried to bend them. Once, he told a kid, "No food in class." The kid pulled out a smoothie and said, "It's a drink, not food." He sighed and said, "Touché." He mellowed out a little after that. Maybe he realized he wasn't training us for the real world, just teaching us to survive it. The next year, when I visited the school after graduation, I heard he'd retired. His replacement, a younger teacher who actually accepted Google Docs submissions. Civilization advanced. Update, 2 years later. When I was a sophomore in college, I ran into Mr. Carmichael at the grocery store. I expected him to glare at me, but he smiled. He said, "You know, I still have that syllabus with your note highlighted. You were right, I wasn't." Apparently, the school district had rewritten the entire late work policy because of that fiasco. They even added a clause that said, in the event of inclement weather, extensions will be automatically granted. He said, "That was the only time in my career I lost an argument on a technicality. Well played." I told him, "You taught me to follow the rules. I just followed them really well." He laughed, shook my hand and said, "You'd make a good lawyer." Update 2, 10 years later. A few months ago, my younger cousin, who goes to the same high school, sent me a photo of something pinned on the history classroom wall. It was a framed copy of Mr. Carmichael's old "No Late Work Accepted" poster. Underneath, someone had written in marker, "Except when the syllabus says otherwise." Apparently, it's a running joke among teachers now. Shorthand for "don't write policies you can't enforce." I didn't expect to become part of school folklore, but honestly, it fits. Sometimes the best lesson you learn isn't from what a teacher says, it's from what they accidentally teach you by refusing to bend. TLDR. Teacher said, "No late homework, no exceptions." A blizzard hit. Half the class missed the due date. I turned in their projects later using the wording from his syllabus that said, "by end of term," forcing him to accept them all. He had to apologize. The policy changed district-wide, and I accidentally became a local legend. Rules are only strong until someone reads the fine print, and sometimes following them too perfectly is the only way to show how broken they really are. Our next story takes that logic to the workplace again, where an overzealous IT department forced employees to change their passwords every 48 hours, until one engineer decided to automate compliance in a way that crashed the entire system.